Okay, this video is just aimed at higher level students. It's part of Unit 3.6. It's referring to the Keynesian multiplier, and I'm going to take you through a worked example of the multiplier and the impact that it has on the macroeconomy. Keynes, as you know, was very keen on aggregate demand management, and this is his sort of rationale for it, his justification, if you like. I mean, he's very much of this view that we need to sort of constantly encourage the economy to be spending money, and demand is everything. Demand leads, not supply. So it's important, if you want your economy to recover, that you promote spending in that economy as best you can. And we've got to remember the context, as well, that Keynes was writing this very much in the 1920s, 30s, when most of the world was experiencing a sort of major depression, recession. And so he's seeing economies where you've got large-scale unemployment, very little demand in those economies. And his feeling was, look, it's not going to solve itself through entrepreneurs suddenly deciding that now is a good time for us to start producing. They need to be given the incentive to produce, which comes from a level of spending and demand within that economy. So demand has to lead. Right? So the multiplier was developed for him to help explain the importance of aggregate demand and the manipulation of aggregate demand in the macroeconomy. So let's start with a relatively simple circular flow diagram where you've got households and firms, and you've just got spending, consumption, and income that's received. And the households have got one choice. They can either save their money or they can spend it. Right? And another injection into the economy is the investment. So we've only got investment and savings as our injection through investments and withdrawal through leakage through savings. Right? Now, at the moment, we're in equilibrium in this model because the total demand in the economy, C plus I, we've only got C and I, not G and X and M. But C and I add up to 1,000, is exactly equal to the level of income or output, which is shown here, which is 1,000. And then households save 20% of that, 0.2. We're going to talk about the marginal propensity to save. How much of the household's income do they choose to save? Or in this case, it's 20% or 0.2. And they spend the rest. The MPC, marginal propensity to consume, is 0.8 or 80% of their income. Right? So this economy is in equilibrium. And then what we say is something happens. And in our example, because we've not got the government shown, we're just going to assume investment increases. So maybe producer confidence has gone up in the economy. Maybe interest rates have gone down. But investment increases to 300. Okay? Now that's created an imbalance now in our economy because the level of demand is C plus I, which is 800 plus 300, 1100, is no longer equal to what the firms are producing. So the firms, we assume, will respond to that increased demand by producing output of 1100. And if they produce output of 1100, they've got to pay the factor incomes to produce this extra output, which is incomes to households. So the households will receive the extra income, and then they'll choose to save and spend the proportions that we talked about before, which means of the extra 100 that they've received, 80% of it will be spent, pushing consumption up to 880. 20% of it will be saved, pushing savings to 220, and the economy continues to move around the circular flow. All right. However, we're not back in equilibrium here, because if we again look at C plus I, C is 880, I is now 300. That adds up to 1180, which we can see is still more than the output, the income that the firms are producing. So we've still got an imbalance. So we'll continue on the circular flow diagram to show now there'll be a further increase in the level of output or income equal to 880 plus 300, 1180, which will further generate changes in savings, 0.2 of that will be saved, and consumption, 0.8 of that will be spent, and we'll go round again. So this will continue to happen until we reach an equilibrium, and that will happen once the level of savings and the level of investment, the leakage and the injection are the same. Okay, so that savings has to increase. It's slowly increasing, but it won't stop until we get to a level of savings that exactly matches the injection. So incomes need to rise up to that point that is going to generate that level of savings. Knowing that we save 20% of our income, we could, do a quick mental calculation and say, well, look, if we're going to save 1/5 of our income and we need to save 300, our income must be 5 times the level of savings, which is going to be 1,500. As soon as our income rises as high as 1,500, we will save the amount that is going to bring us back to equilibrium. And actually at that point, we can also look at the fact that C plus I, total demand in the economy, 1,200 plus 300, is now exactly equal to the level of output or income. So by the two measures of equilibrium, S is equal to I, injections are equal to leakages, and aggregate demand in the economy is exactly equal to output in the economy. Right? So well, look, what the important thing is that what you can see is that the increase in investment that took place here from 200 to 300, right? So there was an increase in investment of 100, but it's led to an increase in income of 500. And that's the multiplier. There's been the multiplier effect on GDP or income as a consequence of this change in aggregate demand. So you can see, look, how powerful this is from a Keynesian perspective in terms of, look, if you make a small adjustment to the aggregate demand in the economy, and it could be the government, we could have shown this with government, exactly the same. If you make a small change to aggregate demand, you can have a much more significant impact on the level of economic activity, GDP, output, incomes, employment. Like you can see real benefits from this. So it's quite persuasive in that sense. Now, there are various shortcuts you can take in order to get to your final answer, and we use this thing called the multiplier to help us with that. And the multiplier is shown by this equation, 1 over 1 minus the MPC being the marginal propensity to consume. And then once we know that, and we know what the initial change in aggregate demand has been, right, we multiply that change in aggregate demand by the multiplier to find out what the overall level of change in income is going to be as a result. So going back to our previous example, we know the MPC is 0.8. So we've got 1 over 1 minus 0.8, which is 1 over 0.2. So our multiplier in our previous example is going to be 5. Right? 1 divided by 0.2 is 5. We also know that the change in AD was 100 because investment went from 200 to 300. So there's been a change in aggregate demand of 100 multiplied by the multiplier, which is 5, is going to lead to an overall change in income of 500. 100 multiplied by 5 gives a change in income of 500. And that's what we saw, didn't we, in the previous slide, that this change here of 100 led to an overall increase of 500. So you can go, once you get, if you want to show this, using numbers, you don't have to keep going round and round. I was just trying to show you how the process works. You can jump straight to the final answer by using these equations. You'll be expected to do those calculations. Here's a diagram to show the impact of that. Look, in the Keynesian, Keynesian situation of a sort of perfectly elastic long-run aggregate supply curve, and the economy is in recession, the multiplier has really significant effects on aggregate demand and can be really beneficial. But if you're not in a sort of Keynesian depression part of the long-run aggregate supply curve, you get less of a benefit, if you're in the upward part of Aggregate supply is perfectly inelastic, like in a classical view. You've got a different sort of view of whether the multiplier is going to work or not. Now, these following slides have got a number of other examples on, and you can try them. This one was a change in investment to 7,500. Just to try it again, you can see the numbers, how they change as you go around the circle, and then the overall change in income. This is the final slide. So that initial change of 2,500 led to an overall change in income of 5,000. It's different to the previous one. I think the multiplier now is a bit smaller. The multiplier was 1 over 1 minus 0.5. The MPC here is 0.5. You consumed half of your income initially. So with the MPC being smaller, the multiplier effect becomes smaller because not so much of the money is being put back into the economy and spent. So, if we want this to be really effective, we need the MPC to be quite large. We want people to be spending as much of their income as possible. Keynes was very big on the fact that having a high MPC is sort of crucial. But you've got to be slightly careful with it because, of course, you also need savings in the economy. You need people to be saving money so that banks have got money to lend. It's not just a straightforward, let's spend everything and everything will be great. It won't be, because you won't then have the funds available in banks for the credit creation process and the spending to take place. So there's got to be a balance there somewhere. There's various other exercises. Here's one with the government involved, so this is probably more appropriate. That you've got exactly the same. It's just that you've now got C plus I plus G as parts of your aggregate demand, and you've got an extra leakage in taxes as well as your savings. Initially in equilibrium, but now the government decides that they're going to increase spending to 200. What is the impact of that on the economy? We can start that process, but we would do our sort of final calculations in much the same way as we did before. You can follow through the numbers here, but the overall effect is that now the change in income using that equation is this change in aggregate demand, which was 100, which was the change in government spending initially, multiplied by the multiplier, which is 1 over 1 minus 0.8. So the overall effect on income is going to be 500. The multiplier again is 5 here. Points to note here is that we're not saying that S needs to be equal to I for there to be equilibrium when we've got the addition of other leakages and injections. What we're saying is that the overall sum of the leakages, S plus T, must be equal to the sum of the injections, I plus G. If we had X and M as well added in as well, that would be the case. So you can end up with an imbalance. In fact, it probably makes sense, because if the government does decide to increase spending, they probably will need to borrow the money. So now you have got government spending more than taxes. They'll need to borrow the difference in order to go ahead with this plan. Okay, and you can have a go at your own example here as well to test your understanding of it.